Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Insight series with me, Chris Fordham, for the light review. Today, we're looking at obtrusive light from the designer's perspective, which is quite a tricky job because obviously he's there to mop up almost after we've made our design decisions based probably not on having a proper brief or even maybe having necessarily payment for certain aspects of exterior design, but really interesting to see what and how he does it and who are people approaching him. So sit back, relax, and loads of hints and tips for anyone doing external lighting. So, Rico, working in the exterior realm for obtrusive light, trespass, spill light, etc., what is the most frequently thing that you're being asked to do? Is it lighting impact assessments, and for whom? And really, what are your biggest challenges? Because it's quite a vital thing you're doing, right? You're checking the designer's work sometimes, it feels.
It's true. It tends to vary quite a bit. You actually have, let's say, some people who are developers who believe that they have the policies and the designs already in place. So they're trying to get you to more or less just double check and rubber stamp what they believe is already appropriately, let's say, designed and has incorporated all of the elements that they need to look at. But in actual fact, obviously, what they're really doing is they're assessing just the limitations of the project that they're actually working on. They really need to be looking, let's say, a little bit further afield to try and identify where else and what other existing lighting is going to contribute to this sort of light spill. So from their point of view, it's almost, you kind of need to go back and almost say, well, okay, if you've done a design, then yes, we can incorporate the lighting as it is, but then it's very difficult to mitigate the effects of any obtrusive light. You're then having to basically take into account surrounding buildings, other lighting which will contribute to it. And particularly, as in some cases, they've actually placed sort of lighting on the edges of boundaries. It's inevitable that some light will spill from it. So to try and then mitigate against those circumstances, either by changing the light position or the optics, is very difficult to do, because those optics are kind of more or less fixed by the specification, and you're very limited in terms of even moving lighting. So it's much better to basically sort of do this at the design process when you're trying to think, okay, I have an area 2 light, and maybe incorporate the effects of obtrusive light within that.
At the start. So in a nutshell, not to paraphrase, but the most frequently thing you're being asked to do is you're being asked to mop up after someone's made a few errors in judgment, perhaps. I mean, I don't want to, they're my words, not yours, but I mean, I suppose we all have our aspirational ideas, don't we? And you're there to basically say, look, what you're trying to do is probably not going to be helpful in terms of obtrusive light, etc. So that's quite interesting. I mean, and the other question, so for whom? It's local authorities and landowners, and I mean, who comes to you for your work?
Yeah, it tends to come from, I'd say it's not local authorities. The local authorities will instigate and say what they specifically want in terms of the limitations. And generally that will follow the guidance which comes from the ILP in form of PLG04, or in terms of obtrusive light, and there is a limitation on that, which is an international standard from CIE, which is a technical report 150. So those are the two sort of, let's say, guidance documents that people tend to follow, and they tend to represent what is available out there. So let's say local authorities will use those documents to place the limitations on that, and then it will be down to the client to make sure that they've actually delivered it. Now, the client in this case could be a developer because he's putting a housing development together, or maybe a sort of, even a retail store, and they're looking to make sure that they're compliant with all of the planning conditions that would be put in place. So where it comes interesting, let's say, is where a manufacturer has been involved who then don't have those sort of CDM regulations to comply with. So if it's from a manufacturer, obviously they are generally constrained by the products that they are trying to sell. They're not specifically looking at developing or designing the whole area to comply with the regulations as it is. Their focus is in purely giving you enough information to sell the product that they basically have. So if there is products from a number of manufacturers, this is where they then find it a little bit difficult to get involved, because getting involved to a certain degree will involve them in CDM, which they don't have insurances and policies to cover against that. Their presumption is that the client will accept the responsibility of the design purely based on the locations and the performance of the lighting that they are there to sell.
Yeah. Would you say that that's one of the biggest challenges then? The fact that you've got maybe manufacturers trying to do their job, in fact, I mean, it's not their fault. They're being asked to do it. It's probably more the client shouldn't be asking them in the first place. But the biggest challenge is trying to enable someone who is looking at it from a different perspective to be able to do everything, maybe. And then that's when you come in. I mean, I do feel for them sometimes, manufacturers, because they're in a bit of a burn, aren't they? They do one thing they're wrong, they do one thing and they're wrong as well. We sort of can't win, but I guess they can only do the best of a job.
And they do a brilliant job anyway, because half of these standards and half of the photometric output all comes from the manufacturers anyway. I think the problem is there needs to be more awareness on behalf of the client to sort of say, well, okay, at what point am I purely just trying to identify a budget, how many locations of luminaires I actually need, purely from a concept point of view, and at what point that actually transfers into something that has design responsibility and culpability if you get it wrong, obviously, and trying to incorporate everything else. So at the early stages, the manufacturers are offering mostly a free design service where they don't take on design responsibility. The client is then having to, let's say, make a risk assessment and say, well, okay, that's got me to a certain design stage, a certain point in the design, but to progress it further, I now need to involve someone with some expertise who can actually give me the right quality of design and reasonable assessment of what the lighting impact is going to be.
Which is where Bianchi comes in, right? That's where Bianchi lighting comes in.
This is very
potentially.
It's much easier not to do the mopping up process, but as in most cases, if someone thinks they can get something for free, they'll basically go down that particular route until it becomes a blocker. And at that point, obviously, you're then trying to say, well, okay, we've got something to work with, but unfortunately, it's not quite appropriate, and therefore changes and amendments need to be made. But of course, obviously, that all now has implications both in terms of timescales for the delivery, cost of the associated work, because they will not have necessarily put in place a budget to make corrections, or that they feel they had enough information at the first place. So this is where really a client's perception of, okay, I can take a free design so far, allow the budget to bring in someone like myself at Bianchi Lighting to say, okay, we can progress this concept and incorporate those design features.
And I think, sorry to interrupt, but to be fair, I think it's not always the lighting designer's fault either, is it? It's because the client doesn't maybe want to fork out for that element of the design process. They're almost just happy to let it run and say, oh, I've got it done now. Let's see what happens.
Well, I think that's the hope, if you like, is that they will basically sort of see, okay, well, we can submit this to planning on the basis that we've tried to mitigate all of the circumstances that are going to come up. What actually happens is that at the planning stage, they are forced to, in the national planning policy framework or even the local planning policy framework, is that those conditions then pop up to say, okay, well, based on the submission that's been placed in front of the planners, they feel that it is appropriate to put in planning conditions and restrictions on the on the construction of the development to make sure that those mitigating factors are included and mitigated. And of course, obviously, the client at that point has already gone down the fair way down the development stage. So it's sort of quite awkward. I mean, there's a recent one I'm doing now where effectively it is a section of road which they're trying to make into a reasonable amenity area as well. So there are things like planters, and there are sort of, let's say, a sense of well-being in that area, which then involves architectural lighting. So at that particular point, you have to say, well, hold on a second, you are on an elevated road section, you're likely to spill beyond the edges of that road. What other buildings are there going to be in the area that are going to need an assessment of light spill and obtrusive light issues? And if that isn't, let's say, thought of in that design process, the developers are normally, well, I've got to light the road section itself. Yes, there's a bit of amenity area here, and I can do something to make that architecturally enhanced, but they leave out the fact that whatever result of that architectural lighting, what is that effect going to have on the surrounding buildings and into dwellings and flats and whatever else that people perceive as private.
Well, actually, what you're saying leads me on to my next question quite nicely, which is where you go for where you refer to these lighting guides. Is it always a combination of a few, like the SLL, CIE, and ILP, or is it just horses for courses? I guess, is it something that generally the client will specify up front, or are you actually driving that process?
No, you've got to try and give the client the right level of advice. So there are generally the two documents that I stated there, but there is a collaboration between these different parties. So as an international standard, it's come down to the ILP for the exterior element of the road standards and exterior standards for that matter. But that also links in with CIBSE to provide general guidance for some of their exterior projects as well. And that is the right approach. It's just a sense that really there needs to be that good collaboration with the European Union to define those standards and make sure that we are represented when those standards change or get upgraded. We need to be there to do it. So at the moment, the UK is well represented by the trade bodies that we have, and that then transfers into guidance documents that we can basically apply. The other situation that generally occurs is that some people will define a guidance document as just that. It's not obligatory, so therefore we don't necessarily need to apply it. The sense really is that the guidance document is there because it's designed not necessarily to be implemented, let's say, by law through them, but as part of the CDM process, they are realistically the only documents that represent the guidance and the limitations to it. So those guidance documents will be used by the authorities that then seek to apply it. So if there is something that is, let's say, I don't know, obtrusive, like to the point that it's to the detriment of the people in the dwellings or the apartments or wherever it is, that they can actually sort of, go to the local authority and force the sort of issue with them, which then may in turn, cause compensation events or, let's say, certainly ill feeling, if you like, and possibly legal situations further down the line.
And cost. I mean, I think that's the main thing, isn't it? Everyone wants to avoid spending extra money for stuff that they've actually mucked up. So that's probably, I mean, even if they're trying to be good for the local community, etc., the bottom line is this is going to cost me money. So you really got to watch out what you're doing, I suppose, is the message, isn't it, there?
It's a balancing act at the end of the day. It's a question of, okay, well, how much money do I throw in at one end? And where is that balancing scale going to sort of rely on for my output? So I can invest an unreasonable amount of money at the beginning, knowing that as it actually gets to the construction process, I've got very little people to worry about in terms of additional costs or mitigating issues.
Wouldn't it be great if you could
Sorry?
quantify that? That would be great, wouldn't it? If you could just say at the start of every project, this is going to cost you X amount if you get this wrong, but it's impossible to do because but that's really what the message should be, shouldn't it? If you don't mitigate this, it's going to cost you X amount of thousand, but it's always the afterthought, isn't it? It's something that people think after they go, oh no, that's why I shouldn't have done that. That's why they asked me for that fee. That's what they were asking for. But I guess we all live in a world where we want things to be different, and maybe then they're not. I mean, you spoke about light pollution in respect to humans, but do you ever have to deal with, nocturnal wildlife and, flora and fauna and stuff? I mean, how often are you asked to look about the effect on biological rhythms and things? And how do you approach this problem? Are you being asked for it more frequently?
I've been asked for it. Is it more frequently or not? There have been a number of occasions where I've been asked to do something which I felt uncomfortable with. And that was predominantly trying to light, let's say, a particular pedestrian footbridge or a footway in a very sensitive environment, with flora and fauna, which is of special interest. And effectively, at that particular point, you need to be very careful and very focused about what you actually light and what spill issues come from it. But that takes effort. That really does sort of take let's say, splitting the work into a number of different assessment areas and actually going to site and taking a look around and seeing what's actually there that you really need to look at. I think a lot of these sort of, environmental assessments and things are not necessarily always communicated to the lighting designer. And the lighting designer basically has to kind of ask or literally sort of assume that there may be something there, even if it's not necessarily reported. And so you bring it up as part of the early design stage processes. You're then necessarily looking at things like circadian and rhythms, and if there are bats present, trying to mitigate using the correct light source and try to eliminate the blue elements of light. The circadian lighting pretty much is a good guide, really, as to what may be suitable in certain areas. And if you can imitate a sunset, for example, with limited light, that should be kind of the area that you ought to sort of, let's say, try to go in these sensitive areas. But a lot of people just basically see it as, well, I don't care about the light. I just want a quantity of light, blast it across the whole area there, and you're sort of trying to, let's say, educate certain people in a certain sensitive way.
I've got to say, the bats come for a rough ride, don't they? Let's face it. They seem to be the nub of every complaint. On one side, you're trying to protect them, and the other side, there's people saying, it's just bats. Why are you worried about bats? I mean, I personally didn't know how important bats were. I mean, I've got nothing against bats. I'm quite happy for them to have a nice life, but they seem to be so much of the discourse is around, oh, well, they're bats. Or this is the bat pathway. This is the bat roadway. I mean, it's something that if you weren't enlightened, you never would have crossed your mind, would it? But I suppose it's just, but it's right. I mean, you have to accept that it's the right thing to do. We can't go and bulldoze our way into nature, can we? Just say, here, animals, you accept what we've given you.
Well, the trouble is, it is a little sort of cycle. The fact that the bats are there in the first place means there is a food source. And that food source, if they weren't there, is obviously going to increase exponentially. So you kind of need something in there to then say, well, I'm going to light the air regardless, and effectively they'll just move. Okay, which is fine. Yes, you can move the bats out the way, but there is an ecosystem which needs to be considered in some way by those people that are affecting, a reasonably large area. And trying to, let's say, just, I don't know, change the local ecosystem is maybe not quite what you really want to be doing. And
it's not right, is it? Let's face it. Actually, I know a lot of your work is desk-based, but I mean, using computer packages, which ones wouldn't you touch with a barge pole? And also, I'm really interested, because this is a question I often ask myself. How do you work out, say you have a valley or something? Because if you've got a valley, an undulating landscape, obviously obtrusive light is fine if it's all flat, but how do you work out where hummocks are, the hills, the stuff like that? Do you have to go into that intricate detail? How do you do it? I mean,
you can do it. I mean, I do generally work in 3D. So let's say, for example, with local authorities, they're really looking, as you rightly say, a straightforward 2D environment. There's no undulations, and basically you kind of get what you get, and that's their preferred package. I think, to be honest, that kind of package is, let's say, limited in what it can do because it is only 2D, and effectively you can't really model within that. So I find those sort of bits of software as a very good, quick, easy guide as to what might be applied, but then take that into a full 3D package so you can actually include, proper elements that are going to affect it. So, for example, if you rightly say you've got a valley, then there's no real reason why you can't create a 3D environment from it. The fact is, it doesn't have to be specifically that accurate. At the end of the day, you're not looking for each and every undulation, but if you can represent roughly what each surface is actually doing, you can orientate the actual the sensitive receptors, the measurement points within a grid, to actually be at the appropriate angles that they need to be. And then you can output those results with some degree of assurance that what you're actually going to provide at the end of the day is reasonably accurate. Because that's the point of doing it. If someone's just basically wanted to stick a finger in the air, then that will basically do it. You don't necessarily need then to support it with all the calculations. But
so with computer programs, maybe you're avoiding it, but you feel free to avoid it. But which ones wouldn't you touch with a barge pole, and which ones? I know you use AGI, don't you, in the past?
Yeah, to be honest,
I find it quite tricky, but
it's a bit hard, let's say, and a bit clunky to operate at times, a bit slow. To be honest, any lighting software package you use is always going to be a much better result. So I don't think there's any that I wouldn't necessarily touch with a barge pole. They all have their uses. It's a question really of trying to use the appropriate software package for what it is that you're trying to achieve. So Light and Reality is fine for 2D environments. It's quick and it's easy. Dialux and Relux are basically, they're similar, and they tend to sort of almost leapfrog one over the other. But they are actually really good, quick packages to be able to sort of give a good indication. But even they have their limitations with obtrusive light, because they're not necessarily looking at the actual emissive area of the luminaire. And in some cases, you might not even have a luminaire model to actually work with. What you can do with AGI is you can actually reasonably represent the luminaire as it should be and define the actually emissive area of that luminaire. And that is actually a requirement in the CIE 150 guidelines. So from that point of view, I can then turn around hand on heart and say, I've actually got a reasonable model. I know what the actual emissive area of the luminaire is, and I'm meeting the requirements of that particular guidance.
I think that is an excellent answer and a good way to end it before we go downhill, right? You've done.
There's always a way of going downhill. We can do that enough, I'm sure.
In an undulating valley, in this case. So thanks to you all for tuning in, and be sure to hit the subscribe and like if you like the content. At the end of the day, we're here for you, and thanks to you, Enrico. You've been an articulate and interesting interviewee. So yeah, thanks very much, Enrico the White, as they say, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Okay, thank you very much. Take care.